Hello and welcome to Sincerely Speaking. It is my absolute pleasure today to introduce you to Alan Diskin. I met this wonderful gentleman at a networking event here locally where we live in the area of West Palm Beach, and we connected right away. And he has so much wisdom to share with us today that I just cannot wait to dive into this conversation that I know is going to be not just entertaining, but value-filled for all of us listening. Alan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. It is such a pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm diving in and the water's not even cold. It's great.
Alan was joking about being Fred Flintstone and stepping into the new era. So we welcome you into the land of podcasting and
do. Yeah.
So Alan, before we dive into questions, I always like to give our guests a little bit of an opportunity to share with us how they got started and a little bit about their journey. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us how you got started in the world of voiceover and being a radio personality like you are.
My journey is a hell of a trip. Let me see. Well, I was born at a young age, and I was always fascinated with the world of broadcasting, especially radio. And I don't know why radio more than television, but I guess it's because of the theater of the mind and using imagination and creativity.
Yeah.
And so when I was a youngster, a couple of years ago, I was listening to radio personalities on different radio stations in different markets, and I was always kind of curious as to what they were all about and what turned the audience on or what have you. And I was always somebody who I guess wasn't that afraid to open my mouth and speak with people. Well, now it's easier after being on the air for so many years to do it. But that's how I got into radio. And of course, in radio, it's a little bit different than when you're speaking in front of an audience that is in front of you, at least a physical audience, because you don't know who's there. And I may be speaking with thousands, hopefully, or millions, hopefully, although I doubt it, but you never know, who are hearing me. But I'm in a studio by myself. The on-air light is on. It's the microphone and myself, and I just go into a trance and do my thing. So my journey, how did I get started? Being that I was always interested in the radio end of broadcasting in particular, I went to what was called a radio school or broadcasting school for training. Cool. And I went to this place in New York called Announcer Training Studios at 25 West 43rd Street. And there we were taught the technique of how to sound like a radio professional, a personality, and what have you. So I went to that school. This is way back when. Should I tell what year? Because, I mean, I really don't want to, pigeonhole myself, but
it's entirely up to you.
I'll put it this way. I started in radio in 1972. So it was right before that. And it took me 6 months of sending out resumes and physically getting into my car, begging for jobs, sending out what was called, audition tapes, which really were on little reel-to-reels. They weren't even cassette tapes yet. And so I would send them out to various radio stations. And finally, after 6 months, I got hired in the business. So that's how I got started. This was in a little place called Ellenville, New York, which nobody knows where the hell it is. But Ellenville, New York is near Woodstock. So if anybody's familiar with that whole scene, the Woodstock scene, that's kind of like where I started in radio.
Wow, that's wonderful. Now, needless to say, things are slightly different now than they were then. Would you say that the audiences have shifted? And if so, how do they compare the audiences when you got started to audiences nowadays?
Well, the audience is looking older. Uh, no, actually, you know, it's funny because radio is kind of a generational thing.
Hmm.
And I'm talking about broadcast radio. I'm not talking about podcasts or anything like that, but traditional over the air broadcast radio, something that my generation grew up with.
Hmm.
I started listening to top 40 radio. I grew up at the height of the Beatles era.
Wow.
And back then, that's what it was. You would listen to radio on your little transistor radio and hear the music and the personalities talking about the music and all that. Um, so we were conditioned, if you will, to listen to radio. When you're in the car, you're on a date or whatever, turn on the radio and go to town, have a good time. Uh, how it's changed is I think today's younger generation, unfortunately, I stress that part, unfortunately, does not listen to radio as much because they want something that they could probably program at their whim
Yeah.
and bring it on anytime they want to, as opposed to radio, which has to be scheduled usually. And so radio is more momentarily, right? And we never know what's going to happen. Even when doing a radio program, even though I may have an outline and things that are scripted out for me that I need to say on the air, most of it is ad lib and impromptu.
Yeah.
Or if I'm doing talk radio, especially, or any other type of guest radio, even if I have a guest in the studio and I have a prepared list of questions, if you will,
Yeah.
to ask this person. And a lot of times, as you know from your own experience, you never get into all those questions.
Yeah.
And I think it's better, kind of like what Larry King used to do, who would play off the guest's answer and develop information in that regard and make it for much more of an interesting interview than being a robot and trying to get through those 10 questions.
No, absolutely. Now, you mentioned ad-libbing, and that is a topic that I would like to dive a little bit deeper into, because one of the things that happens very often in our space now, right, in the way things are done right now, is you hear people talking all the time about content and how do I come up with content? How do I come up with the things to say? How do I come up with new ideas? But you lived on your toes, basically, trying to figure out what to say moment to moment. Do you have any tips, suggestions, or ideas on how to hone in that skill of ad-libbing and coming up with ideas on what to speak about in the moment?
I've been on my toes so much, I feel like a ballerina dancer. um, no, honestly, I don't know if you can teach that.
Mhm.
And I'm not trying to be smug or
No.
anything like that, but I think it's an innate skill. Like most of us are born with certain skills, and it may not be transferable to somebody else. Now, I can talk about technique, but if it's not a natural thing, then I guess you can't do it. A lot of it, again, is being creative, thinking outside the box. And I love double entendre and play on words, which some people don't appreciate that. I happen to have a very dry sense of humor. I mean, it's so dry, it's like Death Valley. But still, and some people get it, some people love it. Other people is like, what the hell is this guy talking about? So not everybody does appreciate it. However, I can take something and you, for instance, can make a statement, and without too much thinking about it, I could probably do a double play on what you're saying, and come up with something. So it's very much just like dancing, or maybe if you're a baseball pitcher and your fastball is not working today, you better come up with a good curve or something else, some other pitch to make it work. And being that radio is very much impromptu or ad-libbed, you can never run out of words. Dead air is the worst thing in radio. And there's no chance for editing or anything like that unless you're recording a program. But live radio, it's like you're there
Yeah.
and you better have something to say.
Now, one of the things that I find is stops a lot of people, let's say it that way, is this notion of what if I say the wrong thing? What if what I say is not taken well? Or what
Mhm.
if somebody gets offended or insulted? Or I just
Right.
don't know what to say at the moment and I end up having dead air. How do you get past this fear or this apprehension of saying the wrong thing or worrying too much about what people think about what you do say or don't say?
Well, first of all, I lead a clean and honest life. So I try to keep it what's called FCC clean. FCC, the Federal Communications Commission.
Yeah.
And when I first went into radio back in the early 70s, literally, there were words you could not say on the air, phrases you could not say on the air. Even something like, this woman is pregnant. Well, you couldn't say that. Like, this woman is, with child, maybe, is what we had to say. I mean, it was just really very, very restrictive. I don't really use foul language on the air,
Mm-hmm.
and I try to keep it clean enough to where anybody in this world, regardless of their age, can listen to me without being offended. So, as far as trying to come up with something, I don't know. I have enough material in front of me that I can probably refer to something off the top of my head. Like, for instance, I was always very good in history.
Mm-hmm.
So, social studies and English, those were my two best subjects.
Yes.
And depending on the type of program I'm doing, I may do like a this day in history
Mm.
type of report on something that happened to us way back when. And usually I'm pretty good at then making an example of that.
Yeah.
Or I'll do a vocabulary thing like the word of the day, like the word exemplary, and I'll spell it out. Exemplary. Let me give you an example. Alan Diskin is an exemplary radio personality.
That he
Now
is.
you know what exemplary means. And I'll just, you do it like that. Now it's fun. It may sound, dumb and stupid to some people, but they get the meaning of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you make it like my cousin Vinny, the better off you are.
Absolutely. Now, how much of your success would you attribute to just plain old being observant?
Very, very observant, never really copying, but observant.
Yeah.
Uh, what did Yogi Berra say? Yogi Berra said something like, you can see a lot by observing. But I try to pick up maybe some phrases or styles or techniques from people that I would admire in this particular business. And then I would try to incorporate into what I do now, not copy them necessarily, but kind of maybe make the listener think, oh, gee, that's the kind of person I like. So for some people, I mean, hopefully I'm turning them on. Other people, it's like, this guy is boring as hell and we're going to turn him off. Uh, like Abe Lincoln said, you can't please everybody. Actually, Ricky Nelson said that. Can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. And see, I just referred to something else off the top of my head. That's how
Yeah.
I do it. So speaking of Abe Lincoln, do you know that Ricky Nelson once said, can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself? But how I'm tying in Abe Lincoln and Ricky Nelson, I don't know. But people get that example. So even in interviewing people, and I love interviewing celebrities and all that, or talking with people, I'm taking phone calls on the air. I try to make it very conversational. I am not preaching to anybody.
Yeah.
It's you and I, we're there. No matter how many people are listening, you and I are the ones having the conversation, even with doing a radio commercial. Now, the one thing that I noticed over the years is so many people make a radio commercial like they're speaking from the pulpit.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, and kids of all ages, and all this stuff. But I'm talking to you. If I'm speaking with you about what your experience is going to be at this fine restaurant, and I mean, I'm telling you, you will just salivate by thinking about the food there, and you're just going to love it, and you're going to tell so many people it's unbelievable. So please try it. I'm telling you, I highly recommend it. See, now what I'm doing here is I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, hey, go tell all your friends, come on out, bring, 10 million people out with you when you come on out there. So there are some people in this business, and that's technique. Yeah. I heard that technique from a guy named Arthur Godfrey. Now, I don't know if you know the name Arthur Godfrey, but he was a giant. I mean, a giant in the broadcasting industry. Not very nice, by the way, but he was a giant nonetheless. But he rose to the top because he did his commercials like that.
Yeah.
And my icon growing up as a kid back in the 60s and 70s was a guy named Dan Ingram. Dan Ingram was the afternoon drive guy on 77 WABC. And I was very fortunate enough to meet Dan several times. I had him on my program several times. I could just sit back and get whole education just from him. And he told me that he also noticed the big mistake that people make in radio. It should be third person singular, not third person plural.
Yeah.
So if we're doing a talk show and I want to talk with you tonight about some of the things that I'm experiencing, and maybe you yourself have experienced that. Now, maybe there's, I don't know, zillions of people listening in, but there's going to be one person in that audience that can relate to it. Absolutely. So if you could make it relatable, and radio is a very intimate thing. Yeah. It's my voice coming through that speaker. I have no idea what I look like, which is a good thing, I guess. And I don't know what they look like either. And boy, voices can really play tricks. Yeah. I mean, just try being in a telephone call with somebody and you think you know what they look like, and then you meet them and it's like, oh man, that's you. It's like, but so I have befriended people, which I'm very happy about in the sense of that it's rewarding. Befriended people who I never expected in a million years to meet. Yeah. And I'm talking about people from all walks of life, not just your typical neighbors. I'm talking about people that are total shut-ins, people that are in jail and prison, people who are in monasteries and all kinds of places. And I have gotten letters and postcards and phone calls and all of that from these types of people. That's awesome. And so when I am asked a question, well, who's listening, how many people are listening, I really don't know. And there really is no accurate way of projecting that. All I know is that the signal either reaches somebody line of sight, if I'm on FM, or if I'm on AM, it bounces off the ionosphere. And somewhere in this world or in the solar system, I am reaching people.
That's awesome. It's funny that you mentioned the speaking in third person singular. That's one of the things that I teach to people when I teach public speaking is you might be speaking in front of thousands of people, but you're addressing one person at a time. You're having a one-on-one conversation with another 1,000 people there. So the more intimate and the more personal you can make it, the better it's going to be for you and for your audience, because then there's that connection, right? That, like you said, that relatedness, making it relatable to the other person. So that's really cool that you mentioned that.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm involved in the on-air side of it. And unfortunately, not as many of my brothers and sisters have been hired in the last few years as used to be. Yeah. The radio industry, at least commercial radio industry, has been fighting podcasts and Facebook and social media and other things. And no offense to you, I understand and appreciate the service that you perform, but it's just a sign of the times. Yeah. So when radio stations are not bringing in revenue, they can't pay people.
Yeah.
So the on-air people who used to make endless amounts of dollars, very few of us are left. Not that I'm making that kind of money, I'm making something. But, most of my revenue, most of my income in radio comes from getting involved with marketing, sales, writing advertising campaigns for people,
Yeah.
and other things related, but not directly all the time on the air.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Since you work with advertising and you've been doing this for so long, what are some timeless principles that you think are being missed by the younger generation that is venturing more into podcasting and these other platforms, but that they could benefit from understanding?
Well, there's a major difference between podcasting and radio broadcasting.
Yeah.
They listen to a commercial radio station. If the station is a good station and the commercial is written correctly and produced correctly and all that, they can get that in a broadcast. They cannot get that in a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And radio commercials work in a subliminal way. It's repetitiveness, frequency, over and over and over again. People may not jump out of their seats the first time they hear the commercial. However, if there's a need for a certain product or service, after a while, if everything else is correct, then it should work. Now, there are a lot of variables to it.
Yeah.
What radio station are they on? Who's doing the commercial? Is it the right demographics? There are so many variables to this. So it's very important. I am very particular and choosy, I think, as to who I try to present myself to regarding marketing and things of that nature. Even though I don't mind taking money from anybody, realistically, money is no objection. Money is no object as long as it's yours, but really, I am being somebody who is humble and honest and wants to make sure that my client gets great results. It's got to be the right client for the right radio station. So, for instance, the station I am on now skews towards probably an over age 45 audience. So if somebody's service or product, if that's their ideal customer or client, that's probably a good prospect or a suspect to become a prospect for me to approach. If it's somebody who is selling, I don't know, whatever young people get today, probably not. So even though I could have a conversation with somebody, I don't want to waste their time or my time. And I would rather people tell me no right up front. Just tell me no. Like Nancy Reagan, just say no, right? And because really, and a lot of people are nice and they won't say no. Even though I ask them to say no, they still refuse to say no sometimes. But there's a lot of back and forth. And I will know probably in the first 5 or 10 minutes of meeting with somebody whether they're a good prospect for me to help promote on the air.
That's awesome.
And, so again, I respect their time and obviously I respect my own too.
Obviously, yeah. Now, you probably get asked a lot about the celebrities that you've had a chance to meet and those interviews and so forth. I would love to know, though, about the most challenging interview experience you've had.
Well, probably somebody who is famous. I guess I could talk about him now because he's dead. But Ed Asner comes to mind. And I interviewed Ed about 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, on the air. Now, Ed Asner, I mean, anybody in this world who watches television and movies knew who Ed Asner was.
Yeah.
Even though he was not a leading man, but he was a great character actor. Mary Tyler Moore, Lou Grant. He was in The Untouchables, a bunch of TV westerns. I mean, the whole thing. But it was challenging in a way, not because I didn't know what to ask him, but I felt embarrassed by what he was saying. and I'm no prude. But I guess when you're interviewing a big celebrity like that, you can't always control how they want to come across.
Yeah.
So while I was interviewing Ed, you could tell he had something rolling around his glass like rocks, right? Ice. He was drinking. It wasn't Kool-Aid either. He was having a good. It was just fine. He could do. Hey, he could do whatever he wanted, but he was very what I would call blue
Mm.
on the air. Now, again, I am no prude, to say the least. Um, and I asked him this right after Mary Tyler Moore died. So, Ed, I mean, you've worked with so many celebrities, including Mary Tyler Moore, one of the biggest in the business.
Yeah.
Tell us about Mary. What's it like to work with Mary Tyler Moore? Yeah, you would have thought, well, she was a fine actress and all that. He didn't even get into that. Oh, Mary Tyler Moore, boy, would I love to jump her bones. I mean, now he said this on the air, and he said this about several people,
Mm.
movie stars, TV stars, and things of that nature. Look, it's coming from me. It's not coming, from him, not coming from me. So I didn't feel bad about it. However, um, my show was not like Howard Stern's show. So, and on top of that, I happen to be working on a Christian conservative talk station
Oops.
at the time. I am personally neither conservative, and I'm not Christian, although I obviously have many Christian friends and so on. But I felt bad because I knew darn well management was listening in.
Mm-hmm.
And I just could not wait to get to a commercial break to get him off the air. And that was really not a good thing, So that was not, but I know it wasn't me because
Yeah.
I've talked to colleagues in this business who have interviewed Ed and they've had the same experience.
Mm.
So I don't know what it is. Other people, are very humble
Yeah.
and personable and nice and can't wait to do things for you. And I've had all kinds of celebrities, Regis Philbin, who I had on, who was great. Jane Russell, who brought on Debbie Reynolds at the same time while I'm
Wow.
interviewing her. She was great. Stacy Keach, many people. But even getting in the political side, I've had Alan Dershowitz on the air and Ariana Huffington.
Wow.
And people like that. So I usually have a good time with everybody, and I could care less about their political persuasion as far as bringing them on the air. I could have a good time with anybody, and so for most of the time it was pretty good. But every once in a while, you get somebody like that. Like one time, I had Madeline Duncan Brown on with me. She was LBJ's mistress.
Wow.
She wrote a book, Texas, A Love Affair in the Morning with Lyndon Johnson. And she and LBJ got it on for 20 years.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I found her. She was a guest on Oprah Winfrey. And that's how I found out about her. And so I invited her to come on the show. And it's like, yeah, okay, why not? And she was really getting into this. Now, when you think about it, everybody, beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
LBJ was not exactly Mr. America. Okay. Regardless of his politics, I mean, physically, he was like, but I guess when you're that powerful and you have that much money and so on, you can, I guess you're attractive to almost anybody or a lot of
there's
people.
different types of attractiveness, right?
Now, she also was a little imbibed when I had her on the air,
Aww.
but it turned out to be a good interview. So
Good.
I was happy about that. And most of them, I've had Pete Rose on the air, who was very interesting.
That's awesome.
And so over the years, I have to say, that has been a real rewarding experience. I love interviewing people more so than anything else. Recently, my time on the air has been involved mostly with music radio, Legends Radio. 100.3 WLML in West Palm Beach, which is basically a music station.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can talk a little bit about Frank Sinatra or whatever the music is, but with talk radio, it's very different. I mean, you really can get into things. And that's what I enjoyed the most. And depending on the time of the day, I used to do overnights in Miami. I used to be on between midnight and 2 a.m. 5 nights a week.
Wow.
You'd be surprised who's up at that hour and who calls talk shows, because there's so many lonely people. And we talked about this before a little bit. You have no idea who's listening, and people need a friend.
Yeah.
And whether they have physically touched me or electronically touched me, somehow we make a connection there. Absolutely. And I was happy to come into their homes or their shop or wherever they had me in 5 nights a week.
That's really cool. So that's one of the things that I think unites us all, is this notion that through whatever means we use, right, whatever our platform happens to be, we are open to connecting and we are relating to each other as human beings. And that's the bottom line, is just understanding that wherever you are, whatever it is that you're presenting, whatever it is that you're doing, your goal is to engage with other human beings. And the best way to do that is to actually be human, right?
Yes, and preparation too. Yeah. Because when your guest stands you up, and I've been there, like, where the heck is, how come either she didn't get to the studio or she didn't call in or whatever happened. And now it's like, now what do I do? So you were talking about those moments before. How do you cover yourself? So there's a lot of prep time.
Yeah.
And especially in talk radio. Even if I'm doing a 2-hour show, it may take me an hour just to prep that show and come up with things that I'm knowledgeable enough where I could cover no matter what. And I always keep some reference material with me too, old fashioned, like I have a book about old TV shows or movies or what have you. Or we could talk about, the Beach Boys and the Four Seasons music that I used to listen to. And that's all awesome. That. And I can just get off on a tangent, and somebody will call in. I mean, when I first got into talk radio, I had started music radio in 1972. And in the early 90s, a friend of mine who was a talk show host asked me to fill in for him one night, overnight, like at 2 a.m. for 4 hours. And I said, what am I going to talk about for 4 hours? I play music. Oh, come on, you could do it. So whatever. Driving to the studio, my stomach is churning. I have to find a bathroom somewhere. So I pulled off. There happened to be a restaurant that will go nameless. They were open. I went into their men's room. I am telling you, Marcy, it was the worst, most atrocious looking bathroom. I wouldn't let a dog go in there. So all of a sudden the light bulb went off. I said, I bet you there's millions of Americans that go through this every day, trying to use a restaurant bathroom, gas station bathroom, whatever. I'm going to talk about public restrooms on the air tonight. So that's what I did. So the show went on at 2:00. Hi, I'm Alan Diskin, filling in for so-and-so. Let me tell you what happened on the way to the studio tonight. And I start going through this. Have you had the same experience? Call me up. Here's the number. Do you know, within 4 hours, I had like over 20 phone calls.
That's awesome.
People calling in about public restrooms. So
connecting as humans.
If you talk about human interest stories, like why do they always put the slowest cashier on the express line in the supermarket? Or if you go to the bank during lunchtime, why do they send all the cashiers out for lunch? Does that make sense? I mean, right? So people will call in about that. You're right. I've experienced the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the more human you could make it, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Now we're coming to the end of our time together. This has been so awesome. And I just want to...
I can't believe it. What
right?
am I going to do today?
Time flies when you're having fun. That's what it is. So before we let you go, anybody who's interested in learning more about how you help people who are the right fit for what you do, where can they go? What kind of service can they expect from you? And how can they connect with you?
Well, let's pick on the service part first.
Yes.
Uh, the service they're going to get, I used the word exemplary before, that's what they're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're going to get excellence in service. I go out of my way, and more so, to deliver as much as I can, more than I can, help a client be satisfied. Now, I am at Legends Radio, which is WLML 100.3 FM in West Palm Beach, Florida. People can listen or find me at Legends Radio, Legends radio.com. That's our website. Or, can I give a phone number?
Absolutely.
Oh, all right. Don't call. No, here's the number. Oh, that was you. All right. Area code 561-324-0337. That's the number. And call me anytime, usually within business hours, and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, I invite anybody, especially if you are in the Palm Beach or Broward area, even Miami-Dade, if you're local, make sure that you contact Alan to talk about possibilities for promoting your business, opportunities for spreading the word about what you do, especially if your niche or your ideal client is within that range that he mentioned earlier, 45 and above. He can definitely connect you with some of the right people in the right way and do it in a way that is exemplary, like he said. And even if you're not in the Palm Beach area, reach out and see how maybe he can be of assistance or how you can connect and support
Well,
one
you know,
another.
it's funny too, because we have listeners all over the world, really. With
Well,
streaming, it's like being on a syndicated radio program, you know. And if you have a niche, I'll help you scratch it.
Sounds
Get a hold
good.
of me.
Well, thank you again, Alan, for everything. It was so fun hearing your stories and learning more about the transition that you've experienced throughout your years.
Oh,
And thank you for your
let me give
wisdom.
an email. I'll give an email address too, okay?
There you go.
All right. ADISKIN. That's Diskin at legendsradio.com.
There you go. Make sure
There
to
we go.
reach out. Well, thank you, Alan, so much. And everybody, if you have found this helpful and valuable, make sure that you share with all your friends so that they can get the value as well and connect with the information that Alan has to share. Thanks for being with us today, and I will see you next week on Sincerely Speaking. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marcy.